Thank you. So, hi everyone, good morning, it's good to be here. And our panel is actually not only about publishing, it's really about the future. So, as I say, if you guys are interested in the future and what it may unfold, you're welcome to stay and listen in and participate in our panel. We brought 3 world-class experts to the topic of future, and they're going to tell us what the future looks like. And the reason we picked this topic is because 2015, that is ending next month, is also known as the Back to the Future year. This is the year in which the plot of the movie Back to the Future 2 takes place, which is rather astonishing, because you remember when the movie came out, it seemed so far into the future. We couldn't even calculate if we'll be alive by then. But,
How old were you?
I think the movie came out in 89, so I was in high school, let's say. Same as you, right? We were pretty much in the same class. Mark and I are classmates. So before we get to our panelists, we'll just say that, we are now going to take a journey into the future. We're going to jump ahead to the year 2045, just like in the movie, and see what the world looks like in 2045. And the interesting thing is that our panelists will still have the exact same job they have today in 30 years from now. So, the bad news out that you guys haven't moved up.
Job security.
But, yeah. If you're curious, I think in 2045, it's safe to say that Sir Martin is still running the shop. So, not much growth room for you. But then again, you'll probably like your jobs if you've stayed in them for so long. So you'll tell us all about the future in a second. But before we start to ask you about 2045 and what do things look like in 2045, let's have a quick refresher about what does 2015 look like, the year in which we all came from. Just to refresh your memory, because it's been so many years ago and you may have forgotten. So here we are. First of all, first fact you need to know about 2015. The skip ad button that you see on the screen had close to 100% click-through rates, and all other elements on web pages, including the ads and the content itself, had close to 0 level of engagement. Teenagers back in 2015 used to spend their time dropping water-filled condoms on each other's heads. People used to click on any promo title that finished with the words, "You won't believe what happened next." Fast food was delivered by unexpected, size-efficient messengers. The hoverboard, which I guess was conceived in Back to the Future, became a reality for a quick second, but then the authorities figured out that the best answer to the world problems such as war and hunger and everything else is making those things illegal. In 2015, there was a big debate over questions of perception and ideology, so I guess you can say that the world was parted on important matters of the hour. UK teenage girls provided a different set of preferences to who is the man of their dream. Back in the day, computers used to be nicknamed phones, and it was actually named after one of the apps on the device that was used for real-time voice messaging, an app that nobody really used, that was kind of a weird way of communicating instead of just Snapchatting, which is the way most people communicated. In fact, the only way to get anyone's attention was to any message was to convince them that the message will self-destruct in a few seconds. So you only have a limited opportunity to listen to it. And finally, the leader of the free world has announced plans to become officially the leader of the free world. And I guess that today, in 2045, we are very curious to hear about the 6th term of President West in office. So you can tell us all about that. So first of all, allow me to introduce, we have Sarah Hertz, Head of Digital at Condé Nast, on my far left. In the middle is Megumi Ikeda, Venture Partner at Hearst Ventures, and Mark Reed, the CEO of Wonderman. So, tell us a little about 2045. Specifically, let's talk about media. So, where we come from in 2015, media used to mean a whole lot. Whether it's print or TV, on radio, any type of media, it played a very important role in people's lives. And I'm kind of curious if you'd say that this is still the same today in 2045.
Yes. In fact, when you add up media usage, it's close to approaching 100% of time, including the time people are asleep. So if you sort of extrapolate, in 2045, people will be spending 125% of their time consuming media in a non-linear fashion. And the good thing about 2045 is I will be at least over the age of 70, so anything I say now, I'll be too senile to really care about whether people come back and say I got things completely wrong. So I think, I think virtual reality will be something. So we'll kind of
Is something. We're talking about the present.
It will be more than, people were saying, sorry, it is something now. I mean, virtual reality is past, isn't it, really? Now you just close your eyes and you just think things, and things sort of appear in your head.
All right, so you say that the medium may change, but, there will still
and you remember the
constant
time when, advertisers used to sort of try and influence what you wanted. Now, we already know what you want before you know you wanted it yourself. So sort of the thoughts will appear in your head, or appear in your head in that way.
Interesting. What about, curious, back in 2015, there used to be a lot of concern about privacy. People constantly spoke about how concerned they are about giving away their personal information. Well, in reality, they were very happy to volunteer this information every time they were offered a coupon or, any other incentive. Looking into the future, do you think that the fact that we gave up all of our information and it's now owned by large evil corporates, has that really influenced our lives?
Influenced our lives? I guess so, but I think people are going to be willing to do it because the desire to have that coupon or to step into that VR world is too compelling for people to say no to.
Right.
I can't see that changing. Media is something that people have always had, and it's not going to change.
I mean, look, we're very happy for Google to know everything about us, aren't we?
Right, of course.
And Larry and Sergey, now know everything, so it's fine.
I'm
Do you worry about that?
I'm curious because I feel like everybody's talking about being worried, and at the same time, they're signing up to all those services, they're providing a lot of information, and they're being more and more open about it. So, I'm curious if, looking back 30 years, from a 30 years perspective, do you feel that those concerns have really materialized, really the way that this information is being used is in any way abusive to end users?
I think there's a big paradox about, ad blocking and everything about millennial, because we're speaking a lot about the millennial generation being allergic to ad. And in the same time, there are the more interactive users with brands. They like brands, they love Red Bull, they love content of brands. So I think there is a big paradox, and this is a generation who loves brands and loves messages from advertisers if they're transparent, well done, inspirational. So maybe users will be clever and brands will be more creative and inspirational. I'm quite optimistic about that.
I think the bar will be higher, right? You can't easily get people, everyone knows that they're giving up information in exchange for that interactivity, in exchange for doing something with you. So you have a tough customer.
I mean, we used to be worried about ad blockers. Mm-hmm. Now, when I get a copy of a magazine, I pay someone to tear all the ads out before I read it, because I just find them kind of distracting.
Right.
This
is after you charge the advertisers in order to place them,
you tear all the ads out, and then you read the rest of the magazine, apart from the articles where they had an ad on one side and the copy on the other, which is a bit of a problem.
So how thick is that magazine now?
It's about this, it's about this thick now, really.
Interesting. Back in 2015, I noticed that people gradually started to not communicate with each other directly anymore. They would do it only through technology, only through technological devices. At first, they used to communicate with regular language. Then they moved to verbal language. Then they moved to text, and then they traded the words with emojis and memes and animated GIFs and other stuff. How do people communicate today in 2045? Is that still the protocol?
We have a chip, that chip in your head. And I connect my chip to your chip, and we just think.
So all communication is non-verbal at all, or without any signs.
All non-verbal, and then we have thought blockers now. They've just launched thought blockers in the iOS, 5052, that block other people's thoughts from invading your head sort of involuntarily. Because sometimes those thoughts might be ads, which are obviously terrible, terrible things that need to be blocked. So we have those as well.
No, it sounds like Megumi lives in a bit of a different subculture to yours, so
Well,
she
Megumi
may have
does,
a bit
but
of a
she
different
has
take.
Well,
She was one of the cool kids, you know. That's
her
something
phone
that-
is now so sensitive that when she's about to walk into a lamppost, it alerts her.
No, I
So she
think all
doesn't
of that,
do it.
right? There'll be a beacon on the lamppost. It'll tell me.
Yeah.
It'll give me some type of fair warning to steer me without me realizing it. But I also think that ads will be completely blended in with the content. So to block those ads will be quite difficult.
You know, there was a common perception back in the day that if we spoke about the fact that media still plays a central role in people's lives, but back in 2015 we used to say that print is dead and that TV is about to die, while in reality, if you looked at the media spend, the majority of the money was still best spent in those outlets rather than the new ones. So people thought that it's still the most effective way to communicate with consumers. Is that still the case today in 2045?
I think the print question is, and maybe I don't want to be rude, but I think it's an obsolete question because today we're more about, I think content is king today. Everybody wants to tell stories, brands. We work, with most luxurious brands, creating them stories. So the key word is content because all the brands need content to create traffic, to create interaction in their social networks. They want engagement, and content is the best way to create engagement. So print is only a way to distribute and create content. So I think we're in a generation where content is so powerful. So for publisher, the question is how to distribute and create content for advertisers, users, brand lovers. I think this is the key question for us. And another question for me is to capture the attention, because when we speak about ad blockers, it's attention blocker. People do not want to be interrupted all the time when they are in front of a story or a beautiful picture. So it's more about, for us publisher, how to capture the attention and to win the battle of attention. This is the key question for us.
And while we're on the topic, so you mentioned that content is still king and it's about distribution. What about discovery? Back in 2015, content discovery was almost monopolized by social networks, specifically one named Facebook. I don't know if it still exists today and to what magnitude, which is another interesting question. But really the role of the publisher, the role of the content creator became more centered around creating great content, telling great stories, and then they had very little control on how this content gets distributed and gets discovered by end users. Do you find that this is still the case today?
Yes, I do. And I think that there's more and more awareness about how to tailor the content for each distribution channel. What you do on Snapchat will be very different than whatever the Snapchat of 2045 is. And people know that. There's still a home page. There's still some type of homing place for Louis Vuitton people to go to, or to the Nike to go to, the big brands. But it is very widely distributed.
Right.
I don't know. There's so many home pages, aren't there? I was on Yahoo. Oh, no, maybe not.
But that's not a brand, or I guess.
I think that, the role of publishers 30 years ago was to assemble audiences and give them content that they're interested in. But today we know what our audiences are interested in, so we don't really need publishers in the same way. And the old monopolistic ways of controlling access to that audience have gone away, right? You just have a relationship over a very open internet system. So I think that publishers, some have thrived, but most people want to talk to other people, if you like, and they can do that without publishers. Publishers have sort of become another intermediary, if you like. So if I want to know where I want to go on vacation, there are some travel bloggers I can talk to. So I think individual brands, have become much more important than they were 30 years ago, because they don't need to be assembled and curated by these corporations that put them in print. So I think there's a lot more fluidity, and we could see that 30 years ago. We could see whatever PewDiePie earning money because effectively he's sending people to buy particular games. You know, we can see particular journalists taking off and being able to sell their own content. And I think that that's just the way everything is. We know so much about people, or Google know everything about people if they help us, that we can reach people in that way, right?
I agree. I think the publisher will become less and less important. The brands, I think, still resonate. But the publishers, the difference between a publisher and a reader, those are the same thing. The people creating the content or the people reading it.
And I think the death knell for publishers was when they totally embraced native advertising.
Yeah.
And then they blurred the line between
Authentic.
editorial content and paid content. And they thought that that was the solution to their problem, but actually it meant that people paid less and less attention to what they said because they just thought it wasn't independent, and they spent more and more attention to people that they thought were authentic and weren't being paid. You know, we had all of those rules on what bloggers could say and what bloggers can't say, so now we know if I have to watch, you know, Jim Chapman on YouTube, I know whether someone's paying him or not paying him, and we know where things are.
You know, for us, I mean, native is like a new word, but it's, you know, we have done native for years, and one of the first definitions of native has been imagined by Ogilvy in '63. You know, in Vogue, for example, we are using the same models and the same photographers as advertisers, so the border is very light between a beautiful picture of Yves Saint Laurent campaign or a picture that we're making because we're using the same talent. So I think native content is a way of creating beautiful content, inspirational and engaging. So we're not ashamed of creating content for brands. I think this is a natural, way of working with luxury brands.
I think the keywords are authenticity and transparency.
Yeah.
So if you know that it's being created by someone, and you know that that's them creating it as opposed to being
I always
forced
think
to create it.
it's like the difference between a restaurant review and a hotel and a travel review. I mean, I've never read a bad review of a hotel in a publication. It's amazing. Like, no one's ever stayed in a hotel and on a publication
As
ever had a
opposed to-
bad experience. Whereas they go to restaurants, they have bad experiences all the time. Now, it may be something to do with the fact that restaurant reviewers pay their bills and hotel reviewers don't pay their bills, as I suspect. So it's like, you know, that's the difference between authenticity and not, you know. And I think you lose that at your peril. Or we've lost, this is quite hard to be 30 years in the future and remember, but anyway, we've lost that at our peril.
Sure. So we spoke about the, from the editorial perspective about what is the role of brands versus publishers. What about the content author? It used to be, back in my days, back in 2015, the publishing house, such as Hearst or Condé Nast or, big brands, were the accommodation through which an author would build their reputation. So they would, write for one of your properties, for, Wired or Vogue or whatever that is, and that's how they would build credibility. That's how they would become a brand. But now, just before I took the time travel to today, there used to be also a new breed of authors that just emerged out of nowhere and build their popularity sort of single-handedly just by virtue of the quality of their content. And I'm curious whether today more content is catered by independent authors, non-branded authors, or there's still a role for the big, credible, old-school publishing houses. That's a tricky question to direct to a representative of two of the largest publishing conglomerates, but it's a very factual question about the present, so hopefully you're comfortable answering.
You send us your questions. Your questions are so good, but I think their answers are so tricky. You're right. The authority is not as big as before. I have a very funny interesting example to share with you. We're creative. We're doing the editorial platform of Pierre Hermé. Pierre Hermé, famous macaron. And Pierre Hermé is like a very, very modest man. He doesn't speak, but he told me that his career starts with an article of the Vogue US about a culinary journalist saying that he was the Picasso of the pastry, and he made his career. I don't think that today something like that can happen. Maybe if Anna Wintour or Karin Rothfeld say something about a creator, but I don't think the influence is as big. But I think the brand, the power of the brand is bigger. Maybe the power of journalists is smaller, but for example, Vogue Paris, we have 4 million fans in Vogue Paris in Facebook. We're a huge community. So our community are very strong, and the question is what to do with our community, where the power of our journalists maybe is becoming smaller.
If your brand or publishing, if Hearst or Condé Nast or Vogue or Cosmo becomes a platform, a distribution platform with a powerful brand behind it, then I think it's still relevant. But a writer can now be uploaded onto the web, and it's a question about distribution. Will they be properly distributed, and will it see? There's so much good content I'm sure we never find.
And has it been, do you feel that in 2045 the publishers took a more active role in making themselves as participatory media in which the audience is taking place in creating the content, or have they stayed stride and true to being the sort of broadcaster mentality of creating the best content and catering it to the masses?
Of creating their own content. I think you have less and less control about which content you're creating, and more control over which content you're choosing to have on your platform. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, you know, the future tends to be tricky. It's hard to, it's hard to know exactly. You've touched on the issue of data. And, you know, in my time, in fact, just before I hopped on the time machine, I read an interesting quote, I don't know who to attribute it to, of somebody that said that, he said, big data is kind of like teenage sex. Everybody claims they do it, but nobody knows exactly how it's done. And, you know, I felt it was a really good description of reality as I knew it in 2015, in which everybody, you know, accumulated a lot of data, paid a lot of different analytics and BI companies to gather a lot of data for them, create very fancy presentations with them, and create some loose attribution between this data and some business decisions that they wanted to make anyway. But it wasn't quite clear about whether the thing is really happening, is really useful, and is really going somewhere. And, you know, I'm curious now, 30 years into the future, has this data really become a cornerstone in the way we do business, or did it stay as some sort of a chaotic environment that, you know, we're trying to make sense of?
Yes, I think. Yeah. But I think,
thank you.
And I think we'll be, you know, today we're 100% programmatic, aren't we, right? So there's nothing really, you know, we laugh at the fact we used to sell things by hand, if you like, you know. Everything that could be automated has been automated, and they collect data, you know. The pet food company collect data on my dog.
All right, so
I was just talking to my dog on my thought machine, because they can translate languages now. You speak to yours, right?
Yeah, of course.
And you know, he's concerned about privacy as well.
That's good.
So he doesn't want them to know what
His
pet
bones
food
are.
he's eating, because he's on a diet. You know, 100% of people are now obese, basically.
So I guess all the apocalyptic.
Yossi Vardi is now the thinnest man in.
He always was. Back in my day, he was as well.
No, so you know, we have to do that. We're compelled to walk as well by the government to walk off our obesity.
So saying all the data that we collect about how many steps we're taking and how many calories we're burning, all of that is used by the government as well.
They set your tax based on how much exercise you take. Yeah, the NHS here is like directly linked to how much exercise.
That would imply very efficient usage of data by our government.
I think obviously we'll have figured out, I hope, the data question in 30 years' time, and you know, we'll know a tremendous more about how effective a lot of the work that we do is. So.
You know, it's very funny because we are building like a data strategy in Condé Nast, and even the words like data hygienist, data cleaner, the words are so horrible. I mean, you know, it's like there is a big organization issue about, you know, bringing all those data people in like inspirational talent organization. It's first question of organization, and I'm personally, in 45, very afraid of personalizing everything, advertisers' content, because the purpose of a media is also to open the horizon and to broaden the issues that people have in mind. And serendipity is an important word as a media publisher, I think.
I want to read you a quote that relates to, Mark's vision of, Mark's factual mention that programmatic has taken over everything. A quote from 2015 from AdExchanger that said, "Programmatic advertising will make up half of display and video ad spend by 2019. It sounds, based on what you say, that by 2045 it didn't only take over all of advertising operation, it also took over other parts of communication, right? That everything became programmatic.
Well, no one does any work anymore, do they? Because everything is effectively programmatic, right? No, but if you can, I was saying there's this thing in Milan, this car sharing scheme in Milan, which I think they've got 3,000 cars, is totally paperless, right? Effectively, doesn't really need to be any human being involved in the operation of it. Do there need to be any human beings involved in the operation of the media company of the future? I don't know, maybe not, right? It's everything just passes through. You write things, people read it, they pay you based on how many people read it. The advertisers target based on who reads you what you have. Why do we need to have any people? Rupert Murdoch obviously is still running News Corp. And
His sons are still waiting.
Some of the Redstone is still running Viacom.
Well, you'll have to travel much further into the future if you want to see the era that's
he's
beyond
now
that.
the only employee of News Corp because everything else has been replaced by a gigantic.
But if everything is programmatic
computer.
by the authorities based on all the big data they aggregated, there's also not much place for advertising, right? Because there seems to be very little free will in terms of what you can consume. It seems that everything is sort of governed by higher powers.
Well, I think just one thing on that. Can I say one thing on that? So you have to differentiate between advertising and marketing.
Yeah.
Right? They're very different things. I think there'll be plenty of roles for marketing and advertising and part of it. People will still watch the Super Bowl, and I bet you there will still be ads in the Super Bowl in 2045, right? But marketing is a totally different thing, and I think that's what we have to navigate our way through.
So we have to keep the Super Bowl itself non-programmatic, right? That has to be still spontaneous.
I think programmatic is more about display and like basic way of creating awareness and communication. But as far as creativity is at stake, and if you want to create beautiful special operation or native advertising where talent are needed, it cannot be programmatic. No? What about you?
I think just advertising will be very different. We will still have the things that we have now, but in 2045 it will be very different. The type of VR, immersive AR stuff that hits when we walk into our kitchen because we have some chip in our head or in our fingernail, wherever it might be, speaking to the chip in our refrigerator, all of that will lead to a very different form of advertising and highly personalized as well.
So, you guys mentioned some of the stuff you mentioned very factually because it became a part of life. Sounds pretty horrific to people in 2015. And, I'm wondering if after we take our time machine and go back to 2015, what is it that we could have done or, can do in retrospect to change some of that? For instance, you spoke specifically about the fact that maybe people lost trust in media or in content because they can't draw the boundaries between organic content or genuine content and sponsored content. Maybe we should do something more active around that. What are the things you think that could be done in 2015 in order to make the future sound less, mind-controlled and less programmatic and less in ownership of greater powers?
We have to come to events like this, right? Embrace. No, well, part of it is about, embracing startups and embracing all the innovation that's taking place. So if you said to me, in my job, which I'm apparently now doing for the next 30 years, God forbid, if I want to be successful in 30 years' time, I want to know what's going on in this community of people, because those are the people that are going to change, the direction that we're going. You've got to be as open as you can be to what's going to happen. I mean, I actually quite like this exercise because I think predicting, if someone said to me what's the next big thing in 1 year's time, actually it's quite difficult to say. But if you want to look forward 10 or 15 or 20 years, actually it's much more interesting as a thought exercise to see what are the types of things you want to, where you want to be, and what do you want to invest in. So
I actually think I'm not pessimistic about what will happen in 2045. I think that there's much more transparency, that authenticity will win, that people will know where content is coming from, that trying to sort of say, oh, it's content, but it's actually quietly, secretly being produced by McDonald's, none of that will work. So I think all of those things, the consumer is going to win because they're going to be smart enough, and there's not going to be a way to hide it.
Basil, would you, in 2015, would you fund initiatives that are not looking at tomorrow or the next few years, but that are really targeting the long run?
Well, I'm in the ventures group, so I hope the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Because if not, I won't be in this job 30 years from now for sure.
Okay.
I'm also optimistic. I think that we have better relationships with advertisers, sometimes without the agencies, asking us like CTR, things that are against the experience. I think we'll be more focused on the user, on the experience, and less on disturbing the attention.
Okay, so you mentioned that innovation comes from startups. One of the interesting coins of speech that were very common in 2015 was to take a certain model and try to apply it to different industries. So we would always say, we are trying to create the Uber of X or the Airbnb of Y. And just curious, what are the models that apply? If in 2015 it used to be really about Uber and Airbnb and other that stood for decentralizing, making things more community-oriented, more accessible. What are the models that apply in 2045?
For me, it's more about a dating company. I would like people to be in front of my content. This is like how can I reach my audience? It's more about, there is a French very interesting company called Appen, a dating company. It's a new way of thinking dating. I think this is a model for us, or something like that. Or Outbrain. Outbrain is a kind of creating bridges between an audience and the content. I think it's more like models that can be inspired.
So to your point about distributed content and the fact that content is out there and can be accessed and consumed in sort of non-linear or non-programmatic fashion, so it's about the creating those bridges and the access to that content?
Okay, an Uber of X for media?
Yeah.
I think
you know the answer and you just don't want to share it.
What is the answer then?
You want it to be the exclusive property of hers, which is very smart business-wise. But
I do think there will be a chip in our fingernail or earring or whatever it might be, because that's the one thing of technology that in 2015 makes me nervous, so I should just embrace it. And I do think it will be something that then leads to some type of immersive, full-body experience. And I think that's around the corner. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's very hard to it's so hard to disrupt the thing that you don't even know is there to disrupt, isn't it? I think Uber, look, all cars will be self-driving, right? So Uber will have been disrupted. I mean, the test of a corporation is, can they disrupt themselves, right? You'd have to say Google have done a pretty fantastic job of going from a desktop future to a mobile future. Can they go from a mobile future to it's interesting. Can they go from a mobile future to a future where they control everything, right? So if you go to...
Or maybe I guess Facebook is making a bet on moving from desktop and mobile to virtual reality.
That's one thing. But if you go to Mountain View now, you get the presentation on the self-driving car. You get the presentation on the connected home. So basically, anything that can be automated, they want to be part of the automation of. And I think it's pretty clear in 30 years' time, all cars will effectively be self-driving. Probably the reality is that it'll be like a communal asset, and we'll just get a car when we want to get a car, because we buy these expensive assets, they sit around not being used 95% of the time. it's logically pretty inefficient, right? So maybe we'll be trying to disrupt that. I don't know.
All right. Well, listen, the future sounds much more mysterious than it was before we traveled there. So, we're going to go back to 2015 equipped with this knowledge of everything that's expecting ahead of us. And let's make a tentative day to meet in unBound 2045 and take a time travel together to 2075. You'll be still holding the exact same jobs.
Bring me a cake.
And you can tell us all about the future. So anyway, I hope that the near future, today and tomorrow at Outbound, is going to be fun, stimulating, and interesting for all of you. Thank you for taking this little journey in time with us, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.